All right, hello and welcome to another Expert Insight interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. It has been a bit rainy, but it's sunny now. And today I'm joined by Chris Jennings, who's literally just up the coast a little bit in Laguna Niguel in Orange County. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Chris is a UCLA graduate, 25-year veteran, working with thousands of small to medium-sized companies with sales leadership and client retention training. Chris, you offer no-nonsense, non-threatening sales approaches that are received, welcomed, refreshing alternatives to the tired, worn-out, old pushy sales tactics. You and your team at Sales Coaching Inc. offer a systematic approach to effective questioning techniques and psychology that is effective for both the salesperson and the buyer. What's interesting about that, Chris, is that how you frame that. You know that your questioning and psychology, it's effective for both the salesperson and the buyer. So maybe
Mhm.
let's just start there for a moment, because a lot of people, and certainly a lot of people in the sales training business and a lot of sales trade, a lot of it is, yes, there is a nod to the buyer, but most of it is focused on the seller. So just tell me how it works for both the seller and the buyer.
Yeah, I think anybody recognizes when they're being sold versus being spoken to in an open and authentic way. And I think if you can keep your buyer at ease and being honest with you about whatever their circumstances are, the two of you could figure out whether you have something to work on or not.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think avoiding putting your prospects on guard and having them be uh, over editing whatever it is that they want to tell you because they're afraid of being pushed or sold or convinced gets in the way of good communication. And what you want is a great two-way stream of communication. That's really all you want.
Yeah, and what are some of the ways you can do that? Because it's interesting, because you say putting the buyer at ease, but let's face it, when we engage, we're a buyer or a prospect. When we engage, when a salesperson first contacts us, we naturally put up our barriers. We're naturally ill at ease. We bring all the previous experiences we've had, and we just go, this is sales guy, and he's going to do, even though we've done it ourselves, we've been on the other side of it, we still kind of forget about all that, and we put our guard up. So how do you overcome that from the get-go, so that that guard doesn't then become a huge barrier?
Yeah. So, number one piece of advice I always give to salespeople is uh, s- listen to your calls and play them back for yourself. And if you sound in any way different talking to your prospects than you do talking to your friends, to your colleagues, to your family, then you're doing it wrong,
Mhm.
because there is something in the intonation in your voice. There is something in the way you're carrying yourself where you're in this convince them mode or please them mode that is different than your authentic self. So number one, just listen to your own calls and see how you sound and see how you come across. Number two, I think you always got to go into a sales call just with low expectations of anything coming out of it. Just and if you keep your expectations low, you're going to naturally work to find out, is there really a good opportunity for both parties or not. And then number three, along the way, I think you need to specifically say things that are designed to relax your prospect, right? To kind of let them know where you're at and that not every person you meet with really needs your help.
Mhm.
And your job is to just figure out if you can help them or not. So,
Yeah, no, those are a great piece of advice. I love that one about listen to your calls and see, because yeah, it's a weird psychological thing, is that we can cross the threshold at work, whether physically or virtually, and suddenly you start to take on different personas, which is always a bit strange. And I always quote my compatriot Oscar Wilde, is like, be yourself because everyone else is taken. And I think that's a good place to start. But I think you're right, because there's been a lot of talk about authenticity, and it was worded a year or two ago, or whatever. But people are getting hung up on being authentic, and instead of like saying you're correct, is looking, what is authenticity? It's how you act in normal, regular situations, and
yeah,
if that's who you really are.
yeah. Yeah, and like you were saying, being yourself is important, and it's not. I don't know if it's possible to be 100% self-observant and engaged in a conversation, because now you're almost listening to two conversations at once, just de facto. But I really do want you to. The only way I think you get there is by listening to your calls, so you could come back after the fact.
Mhm.
Which I'm going to tell you right now, a very small percentage of the sales world does that. So for sales leaders, if you're not providing an opportunity for your team to audit and listen to their calls, whether the sales leader ever listens to anybody's calls or not, right? And there's a gajillion AI
Yeah.
pieces that you could overlap with that too. But what I'm not clear on is if AI picks up authenticity, right? So there's a lot
Uh,
of keywords and key phrases that it can get. I don't know how far it's gotten into authenticity. And like you're saying, that's a big thing in the market, or big word that's now used in business, which obviously you want people to be authentic. But I think at the same time, if I'm a sales leader, I want to have a structure. So I like to follow the same structure of a call,
mhm.
but really be engaged in the conversation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
No, I mean, I believe structure and process are your friend. I mean, and that
sure.
allows you to be authentic. But it's
Hmm.
interesting you say. I mean, nowadays there's no excuse because there's all these simple tools that can record calls and it's
Yeah.
easy. It's not like in the old days when you actually had to either physically patch the sales leader in or you had to sit there beside kind of listening on a
Yes.
speaker phone. I mean, those days are gone, so there's no excuse. I also like what you just said about low expectations. By the way, that's what I use when flying any commercial airlines in the US. I normally set my expectations on the floor, and and mostly they're met and very occasionally exceeded, but mostly they're
Yeah.
just met on the floor. Um, but I think that is, and I think that's a trap a lot of salespeople fall into. And let's get your opinion on that. Is they have like a big goal for maybe for the first call or whatever, but they never sort
Yeah.
of stop and think and say, okay, well, what happens if I can't get that? What would I be happy
Yeah.
with, or
Yeah.
even would I just be even happy with finding out that this isn't the right person?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the underlying cause of that dynamic of salespeople trying too hard to convert every opportunity
Mhm.
into a deal, which is completely unrealistic. But the underlying cause of that is there's just not enough stuff in their pipeline to
Mhm.
begin with. And so if anybody reads or listens to my first book, Conversations Made Easy, the second chapter, I was talking to somebody about this today. The second chapter is called "Do Something," which really, if you're doing enough of these things that we would suggest and referrals and whatever the things are that you do to get business, webinars, whatever it is, if you're doing enough of those, you should have enough opportunities in your pipeline, enough so that you can relax in every call and not be overly attached to the outcome.
Mhm.
If you don't have enough opportunities in your pipeline, then of course you don't relax. Of course you're attached to the outcome. And of course you try too hard and it comes across and it scares away more prospects than it attracts.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. You come across desperate and obviously, I mean, understandably in many ways, as you said, if you have your pipeline is bare and and this looks like it's a great opportunity for you. I mean, it's very easy to get carried away. And then you said about um designed to help, relax just keep it all relaxed. And let's face it, oftentimes, when somebody gets into a sales call, the salesperson goes the opposite way from relaxed, right? They actually get more
Yeah.
tense and maybe intense as it goes
Yeah.
along.
Yeah, and there's a number of factors that are playing into that, right? Where are they at personally?
Mhm.
Where, even their finances factor in there. If they're, strapped for cash and they have a potential deal in front of them, they're going to try harder.
Yeah.
But you really have to get yourself to a point where you're completely unattached to the outcome of any given one prospect. Now,
Mhm.
I want you to have goals. I
Yeah.
want you to, to aspire to sell a certain amount of stuff over the course of a year or a quarter or whatever the period of time is. But I don't want the prospect you're in front of to ever feel like you have to get it from them.
Mm.
Because if they feel like you have to go, you have to get them to buy to achieve your goals, it's going to work against you.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly. Because that's where the trust factor kind of, that's where somebody's
Mhm.
going to question the trust factor, because I'm going to go, yeah, I like Chris. He seems to be a good guy, but he seems so invested in this deal that I'm wondering, it's just
Yeah.
planting doubts in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
And tell me, Chris, as a switching gears to the sales leader side of things, because I mean, I believe, and I'm sure you agree, is like your sales leader is your greatest revenue multiplier, because your sales team will take their cues from your sales leader, and if your sales leaders focus on the right things, are you seeing any changes in what a sales leader needs to do today, given how things have changed, how much noise there is in the market, there's AI, there's all these other distractions going on? Are the fundamentals still the same, or have some of them evolved?
So that's a great question. The I would say the fundamentals are still the same. You have to assume that you have good players on your team, and it's your job to turn them into great players. You have to have a development program in place. I don't care how good your people were when they came to you, you have to have a way to make them better than they were. I think you want to have a bench. You want good bench strength so that you're not overly reliant on a couple of big producers that are driving the majority of your revenue. So those things, let's say, have been consistent for decades, and I would imagine will continue. The Looking though realistically at how you're using AI along with the other tools that you have at your disposal, if you're not up to speed on that, you're gonna get left behind. I think the quote that we've been repeating is that AI won't replace humans, but humans using AI will replace humans that are not.
Yeah, yeah,
And I believe that you're going to have to get up to speed as a sales leader about how to be smart with that, and not. And here's the for me, like, the toughest thing about being a sales leader is so much flows through to your desk and your purview. What do you do and what do you not do? And unfortunately, those first few basics for a lot of sales leaders, those are the ones that get left in the dust,
yeah.
especially if we're having a good run. It's a good quarter. Why am I developing my people? By the time you're in a bad quarter, it's a little bit late to have a big impact in the middle of a bad quarter in terms of improving their skills.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation, Chris. Once, it was just after when I was running Huthwaite, this been selling the global sales consultancy, and I was in Singapore, and it was just after the financial crisis, and one of our large customers, their huge sales team, they were in a downturn, and I remember him saying to me, he goes, I don't understand it. He said, my sales team was so good, and now they're not. And I said, well, how do you know they were good?
Yeah,
And he said, well, they
right.
brought in all this thing. I said, yeah, but let's be honest. I said, budgets were plentiful. I said, anybody could sell in that environment. Let's be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
And eventually he was saying, yeah. I said, so how do you know they were good? I said, you're finding out now whether they're good.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, in an up market, everybody seems like a brilliant salesperson.
Yeah.
If the and a lot of revenue just comes from the marketplace, and there's weight. So what ends up happening naturally, some complacency sets in.
Yeah.
Clearly, if we're doing so well, we must be doing all of the right things.
Yeah.
And I would almost say, John, since you wear that, you've worn that hat too, and wear that hat as an outside consultant,
Hmm.
it's almost impossible when you're in it to see all of those factors, and you almost need a second set of eyes. Like, you know, you and I started a little later because I was getting a second opinion on some blood clot stuff that I've
Oh,
had to unfortunately address. And I can't see it all myself. I'm almost too close to it. I
yeah.
need that second opinion. And I would imagine most sales leaders, if they're not getting some coaching or don't have an outside resource, they're kind of hoping the market continues. But some of them are really disciplined in how they
Yeah.
develop people, but
But
most people
a
just
lot
run
of
out of time.
yeah, and I think the other thing too about developing people, and this is true for all roles, as well as sales, is that we have this weird human trait where we want to focus in on the thing that that you're worst at and weakest at, right? And
Mhm.
focus in on that and try and change that bit instead of looking at the things that you're good at or pretty good at and saying, let's make you even better at those because you're more likely, number one, to want to do it, to like doing it, and to be able to, to get good at it. The things that you're really, really bad at are probably things that you hate. You're never going to be any good at, and you're never, and the best you can hope for is to get mediocre. So maybe you need to be looking at how do I make your job more about your strengths and less about your weaknesses.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to predict. Is somebody gonna improve dramatically? Like, so we've seen that. Some people who were good at referrals became phenomenal referrals because they can't began got so good at referrals
Mhm.
that they always did more business than everybody else, just
Mhm.
from that one improvement in that one skill set. But some of it too, it's like I say, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
Like, is the student ready? Are they bought into like personal growth? Are they ready to look at their confidence? Are they ready to listen to their own calls, just like anybody who's wanting to perform in any skill? So there's just a number of moving parts to this. So
Yeah, and then I guess that though you touched upon that. I mean, when you're hiring or you're recruiting for salespeople, coachability is obviously a big, big factor to look at because the other thing you mentioned about, yeah, it's great, and we've all inherited those big producers, those people who knock out their numbers. But once you've worked with them for a while, you realize they cause chaos in your organization. They don't follow any process, all of this kind of stuff, and you often end up at that crossroads where you're going, you know, everybody can see I'm making an exception here for this person because of the money they're bringing in, which can be understandable, but it can have a knock-on effect.
Oh, yeah, no question. I mean, most sales leaders at some point or in their career are going to feel held hostage by somebody who works for them.
Yeah.
That is an eventuality. And so when we talked about always having an event, always having a bench,
Hmm.
and I think so. One of the books that I really enjoyed as a leadership book was 11 Rings. It's Phil Jackson, basketball coach
Oh, yeah, yeah.
who had 11 championships with the Bulls and the Lakers, and he had the chance to coach Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, and the list goes on. So with those high performers, like getting them to fit in your system, in your process. So, the real question is to the sales leaders, what is your process? What
Yeah.
is your system? And then how do you help each one of those, whether they're a high, medium, or low performer, fit into that process? And how do you use your process to diagnose and improve performance? And that's a great question for all sales leaders to ask themselves.
Yeah, and I think that it comes back again to the idea of, as you said, is like, do you consider process your friend? Have you got a well-defined process, or do you have a process that you defined 3 years ago and you went, thank God goodness I defined that, we have our sales process in place and we're good? Or are you constantly revisiting it, looking at it, trying to tweak it,
Yeah,
adapting it to buyer behavior? And then are you examining the different phase of it and looking at different people at different points? Because I mean, there's
yeah,
so much information it can give you.
yeah. I mean, that's kind of the cool thing. I mean, if you get into, I would say, like, great salespeople are addicted to their own performance. Great sales leader are addicted to improving the performance of the people that work around them.
Mhm.
And like you're saying, yeah, there's a hundred or 1,000 different ways to improve performance. And it can get a bit overwhelming. But if you have a process that you're going through again and again and again, and you're a student of the game yourself as a sales leader, as well as your team are all, they're all, your team members are all students of the game, you're going to figure it out.
Mhm.
Um, if you're, really market reactive, overly market reactive, I'll say, you're just, and or maybe like a lot of sales leaders too are kind of the go-to salesperson that they bring in and that closes every deal
Yeah,
because
yeah,
they're the most talented salesperson, which is a, very, I know it's attractive to senior leadership, but it's
yeah.
also very, slippery slope. So
Yeah, that is one thing that I wish we would come up with a solution for, because I think that's one of the drawbacks of just corporate business in general, is that we tend to have one career path for people only. It's like, oh,
mm,
you become a manager, then you become a your department head, then you become this, and not everybody is suited to that. And you're right. And what do? We take our best salesperson, we say, you're now the sales leader, even
yeah.
if they may not even want that, but they may be completely unsuited to it.
I love that conversation. I have had it so many times, and salespeople tell me, "Well, I'm hoping someday to become a sales manager or VP of sales."
Mm.
And I ask them usually, I'm like, "Well, why is that?"
Yeah,
Right? And almost always they're stunned that I'm even asking them that, and then they kind of say, "Well, I want to advance." I said, "Do you want to advance or do you want to make more money?"
yeah,
I want to
yeah,
make more money. Okay, well then you probably should stay in sales. If you had told me like I want to develop people around me, that's where I want to be in my career, that would be a different conversation we'd have. So
yeah. No, 100%, and that's why I always think it's always best if you have, with your comp plans for salespeople, uh, shouldn't have any caps, because
yeah,
you should want them to out earn everybody. Because if they out earn everybody, then everybody's doing well.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I've seen plenty of examples of that. Get interrupted along the way for
Mhm.
a variety of ego reasons. But
Yeah.
the sales leadership job, to me, it's always been, people ask me this a lot, it's such a hard job to be a
Oh,
great sales leader.
yeah.
I mean, there's not a lot of great sales talent, but there's a lot more great salespeople than there are great sales leaders.
Mhm.
And so we were, I mentioned our book Conversations Made Easy. We are just, finally launching an online course that follows the Conversations Made Easy book. And I was personally reviewing all the leadership material that we had in there. I was like, wow, I'm really glad that's going to be out there, because the majority of sales leaders that I meet are just overwhelmed, and they've had a hard time establishing a process while doing
Mhm.
all these other things that
Yeah.
senior leadership or ownership is asking them to do. And it's usually an unrealistic ask.
Yeah.
You're asking them to boil the ocean, and nobody's capable of that. So I'll come back to, hopefully your listeners are students of the game. I'm going to
Yeah.
assume they are because they're listening to this podcast, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And hopefully they just soak up as much knowledge as they can to become better leaders, become better salespeople, and become a student of the game, and and develop their process as it relates to the application they're in. So
Yeah, absolutely. No, this has been great. Yeah, and yeah, just in conclusion, I totally agree with you. There's less great sales leaders out there because it is such a tough job. But there's a lot of ex-sales leaders who went back into sales because they realized how tough a job it was.
there,
Um,
there's probably a lot more of those than there are great sales leaders,
Exactly,
anyways.
exactly, exactly. Chasing sales, former sales leaders. Well, listen, this has been great. All of Chris's information will be below here, below this video, including links to the book and all that good stuff. But before we go, please do tell people a little bit more about you and what you do.
Yeah, so Chris Jennings Group, we work with individuals and companies to try to help improve sales performance via either one-on-one group coaching. A lot of times with organizations, we're just evaluating the existing process and holding it up to our metrics and the tools that we know to work, from having worked with 2,500 different individual organizations. We've seen a lot,
Mhm.
and we fortunately get to see a lot more than the average sales leader. And hopefully, sales leaders out there would find us to be their friends. Great sales leaders leverage our team to have better results. And been a huge fan of sales. I'm a huge sports fan in general, and sales is my number one sport. And so we root for our clients to perform better, and we bring process to help them get there. And
Right.
we create a lot of tools to do that, and have a great team that goes out on individual assignments that are usually, depending on the industry, will assign different team members. So
Yeah, perfect. Well, like I said, all the information below this video, and I would encourage you to go check it out. So thanks again, Chris. Thank you for watching and listening. I'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.
thanks, Sean. Take care.